Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things. My guest today is former Secretary of State John Merrill. He is one such person. Secretary Merrill, it's good to have you here. I want to start by asking you about your proudest accomplishments as Secretary of State. Most people don't know this, but you wanted to be Secretary of State when you were a 14-year-old boy.
That's right, Alan. And you know, one of the things that people are amazed at is that I would even know what the office did at 14, but because of the circumstances that surrounded that, back in 1978, I was able to know a little bit about the position. My father was the probate judge in Cleveland County, and we had an event that he had invited a lot of people to, and when they had the primary that year in September, and the runoff was in September before the general election in November, I was able to meet Governor Siegelman, who at the time had never held public office and was actually running for Secretary of State. And that piqued my interest and started my desire to ultimately become what resulted in my election to be Alabama's 53rd Secretary of State in 2014.
Well, the Secretary of State's office has a few different responsibilities. You are the chief election official for the state, but you also work in business services, which is about, I think, 65% of the work, and you did a great job at making sure that that office ran efficiently. Tell us a little bit about what you did to accomplish that.
Well, you're very kind to say that, and it is 65% of the work that we do in the office of the Secretary of State, but one of the things that people don't necessarily realize is how important it is to the daily lives of folks all across the great state of Alabama and throughout the nation. Because whenever you form a business in our state, it has to originate in the office of the Secretary of State. And when we inherited the office, they were 7 to 9 months behind on business filings. And when we left the office for the last 6.5 years, actually 6 years and 7 months, we had been at same day or the next day on business filing, so no more than 24 hours. We were doing that with 13 less people. We had gone from 49 employees to 36 team members. And we also had that result in cost savings that were $3,113,119.95. So we take a lot of pride in telling people we were no longer moving at the speed of government, we were moving at the speed of business.
Before you took office, you went up to the building and met with every single employee who worked there. Why did you do that?
Well, Alan, I don't think you can appropriately or properly manage people unless you know them, unless you know what motivates them, unless you know why they come to work each day, what their work means to them, what they hope to contribute to the environment where they are. And we wanted them to know that we were interested in them and their lives and their families' lives and why they had chosen to work at the office of the Secretary of State. Our commitment was to help them be able to advance in their careers so they could accomplish the things that were important and significant to them.
And you visited all 67 counties every single year while you were Secretary of State. How did you accomplish that? How were you able to visit all those, and what drove you to do that?
Well, you have to be intentional about it, first of all, because it's not going to happen just because you say, I'd like to be in all 67 counties this year. You have to make sure you schedule meetings and appointments. You get to speak at events or activities. You get to go have meetings with governmental officials or community leaders or church leaders or other folks, school leaders in those communities. And we were very successful in being able to do that 11 times. I actually, for the last 10 years in a row, have visited all 67 counties. And we started that in my new job here at Wagner Engineering in Birmingham because we love to do business in all 67 counties. So intentionality is very important, but making sure that you contact folks that will enable you to get in front of the right people at the right time to help them understand why they are important to the success of the state of Alabama overall. So when you ask me why I wanted to do that as an elected official, it's because the people that live in Coosa County, the people that live in Cleveland County and Randolph County are just as important as the people that live in Mobile County, Montgomery County, and Madison County.
Well, tell us a little bit about this new role at Wagner Engineering and what you're doing and what you hope to do in this role.
Well, I'm the Director of Public Policy and Strategic Markets for Wagner Engineering, and my job is to help us expand our base, our footprint, and our market share in the state of Alabama. And in order to do that, I have to meet with elected officials and key government leaders and community leaders in all 67 counties and all 464 municipalities throughout the great state of Alabama. So it's very important to make sure that we are doing everything we can to let everyone know that every project they have is important to us because it's the most important project that they have going at this time.
And this isn't your first time in the private sector. Earlier in your career, you served in the private sector before you were elected to the Alabama House of Representatives and served there between 2010 and 2014. How does your experience in the private sector inform your experience in the public sector? What did you take from the private sector? What lessons, for example, and apply in the public sector?
Well, Alan, look, it's so important to remember this. People like to know that government is working for them. And the best way that you can prove that is by being responsive to them and their needs. Unfortunately, there are many people in government who think that the people are just there to serve them while they're in government. But I believe, and I think most Alabamians believe, that we want government to work effectively and efficiently and then get out of the way so the private sector can move Alabama forward. No government official has ever created a job. That's done in the private sector. No government official has ever educated a child. That's done by our teachers in the classroom. No government official improves the quality of the health care provided in our local communities. All those elected officials can do, or appointed officials can do, is to create a positive environment so those things can happen. But we should not be concerned about who's getting the credit for that. We need to be concerned about how we can all come together and work together in order to make Alabama be all it can be.
Election integrity is such an important topic nationally. You can turn on the news even in an off year, even when it's not a big election cycle, and people are still talking about election integrity. You sort of made your signature line that hashtag easy to vote, hard to cheat. I don't know if that was yours originally, but it certainly caught on, and it was a phrase that became associated with you if
well,
you didn't
I appreciate that. You know, and I actually had some people that reached out to me after the nomination for re-election occurred and Mike Pence was speaking at the White House in August of 2020, and he used the phrase easy to vote and hard to cheat, and my phone started blowing up with people saying, the Vice President stole your line, he stole your line. But again, it doesn't matter who originated that. What matters is that we adhere to it, because everybody should be committed to making it easy to vote and hard to cheat in every jurisdiction in every state in the union.
Well, can you talk about the Alabama Elections Fairness Project and other efforts that you undertook as Secretary of State to make sure that there was integrity in our elections?
Alan, thank you for that. One of the things that I wanted to see when I became the Secretary the week of January the 19th, 2015, were the files that they had in the office on voter fraud, so we could see if there were ever any repeat offenders or people who had indicated that it had been indicated that they had participated in voter fraud activities or their names had been mentioned consistently in those activities. And they didn't have any of those files in the office. So I contacted Spencer Collier, who was then serving as the Secretary of Law Enforcement for the state of Alabama, and Luther Strange, who was our Attorney General, and asked them if they would be kind enough to consider signing a memorandum of understanding which would enable our people to have a way to report voter fraud activities that they were aware of and alert to. And then that way we could be the repository for that data, accepting all that information. If it needed additional investigation or investigative efforts, we could forward it to ALEA. And then if it was meritorious of prosecution, the Attorney General's office could use that information for prosecution or share it with a local district attorney to make sure it got in the right hands so people would know that if they committed the crime, they were going to have to do the time.
Well, as an administrator in a business school, I work with undergraduates all the time who are looking for internships And you had some key internships when you were in college that really developed into mentorships and got your foot sort of in the door to politics. What kind of advice do you have for students who are looking for internships? And could you talk a little bit about those relationships and those internships when you were a student?
Alan, I don't think anything can be more important in the life of a student than to be able to establish a relationship with a mentor and an adult who is in a role that you aspire to have someday, so you can learn more about that individual, what prompted them to get there, and what you can do to be better prepared to try to advance to that level. I did have the opportunity and the privilege to work for former Alabama Congressman Bill Nichols, who served our state so ably in that role from January the 3rd, 1967 to December the 13th, 1988, when he passed away in his office at 7 a.m. one morning. I also had the privilege to work for Senator Heflin, who was a 3-term United States Senator in Washington, representing the great state of Alabama from January of 1979 until he left office in January of 1997. Senator Heflin was a tremendous asset to the United States Congress because of his leadership role and because of his previous experience as Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. And those experiences enabled me to meet a lot of people from all over the country and to establish relationships with people that I still hold dear today, and to be in a stronger position to understand how you can work with and interact with people who have different opinions than you do and different strengths than you do and different goals than you do, and still be friends and still have disagreements, but be able to move forward and be able to make the entire area better because you chose to involve yourself in those people's lives. When I was at the Secretary of State's office, we had a very robust internship program where we welcomed students from all over the state of Alabama and sometimes from other parts of the nation to our office to work for the summer, and allowing them to see what it's like to work in that type of environment at the state capitol for several months or several weeks depending on their schedule.
You're very good with dates and addresses. Have you always been good with numbers?
Just since I was born.
Well, that's a good place
You're
to start.
very kind. You're
That's
very
a good
kind
place
to say
start.
that. It gets on my wife's nerves all too often, though, Alan. I will tell you that.
Well, I want to go back to your undergraduate years because you served as president of the Student Government Association. When that happened, when you made that decision, were you thinking along the road that you would be entering into politics? I know when you were 14, you wanted to become Secretary of State. Was this a step in the direction toward achieving that goal?
Well, it was, but it was not necessarily intentional. You know, a lot of people will tell you that when they met me at the university that I was going to be, that I would tell them, I'm going to be president of the student body and I'm going to be the governor of Alabama and I'm going to be president of the United States. And you know, I've heard people say that to others when I've been in the same room, or they have said it to me. And I don't try to correct them today. I'm too old for that. But I appreciate what they meant by saying that. A lot of people have asked me, look, many Alabamians have served as president of the student body at the University of Alabama, have gone on to be members of the Alabama legislature, have gone on to be members of Congress, have gone on to be United States senators, gone on to be governors or other elected official positions throughout the state. Is that the reason you did it? And I don't think, that's not the reason I did it. I wanted to serve when I was at the university, and that was the natural path for me to take: student senate, vice president of student body, and then president of student body at the University of Alabama. I was the first person in the history of the University of Alabama to serve as vice president and president of the student body. But I wanted to do it because it gave me an opportunity to serve, and I think that people that have been president of the student body that have gone on to those other positions did so not because they were president of the student body, but because it helped better prepare them for success later on.
And what made you choose to study history and politics as an undergraduate?
Well, because those were the natural areas that I was drawn to because of what I enjoyed and what I wanted to be a part of. And that enabled me to have a path to take that I would hopefully get the most out of and be able to contribute the most to.
And you had young people working for you as Secretary of State quite often, and you helped train them and give them a path to their next career move. What was your sort of philosophy as a manager and somebody that had to oversee all kinds of different elements of the job? I don't think people understand how many employees work for the Secretary of State's office, how many different pieces there are to that office, and different people doing different things, and in particular, the young people who are getting their first chance right out of college or right out of law school.
Well, sure, and there's more than 1,000 responsibilities, Alan, to the person that holds the position of the Secretary of State. But what we wanted to do for the young people that came to be a part of our team is to, number one, let them know they were a part of the team, to embrace the time that they had with us enthusiastically, and not to think that they were just coming there to answer the phone or to file things, but to write documents, to write letters, to respond to constituent requests, to make visits, to do voter ID drives, to actually be a full-time member of the team while they were working in the office of the Secretary of State. They were getting a check, so we wanted them to know they were a part of the team, just like they would be if they had been a 30-year member of the team at the same time. So my philosophy was fully embrace and enjoy what you're doing, do it with intentionality, and make sure that you're getting the most out of your experience while you're here. Another thing that we made sure that our students did is they got to visit the Supreme Court and the appellate courts. They got to visit with the Lieutenant Governor. They got to visit with the Governor. They got to visit with the Attorney General. They got to go to archives and history. They got to see all the things, Equal Justice Initiative area, all the things that are so very important to ensuring that their positive experience is one that they will always remember as such.
Is there someone who more than anyone else, influenced the way you think, influence your political views, influence your approach to jobs and your career?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question, because just last week I had an opportunity to attend an event for the Agricultural Hall of Fame for the state of Alabama, where one of my mentors, the person that fits the bill that you just identified for me, more than anybody, was recognized. And I wrote a letter of support for him to be inducted into the Agricultural Hall of Fame. His name was William Flint Nichols. Congressman Bill Nichols served in Washington, representing our state in the 3rd Congressional District, as I mentioned to you earlier, from 1967 to 1988. And the time that I spent with him in May, June, and July of 1983 as an intern in his office did more to A, prepare me, B, to put me in a position to properly evaluate how young people should interact with an office at that level, and C, to know what public service should be. I remember very, very many times where he would invite me to come I was the only intern in the office. They didn't have multiple interns like they do in so many congressional offices today. I was the only intern there for the time I was there. And he would invite me to come talk to him about a particular constituent and what was happening in that constituent's life and why it was important for his office to be involved to assist that constituent. I remember going to the Capitol building one time in my tenure and taking him some papers. He had to step out of the chamber to go into a big room, a cloak room, and sign those documents. While we were in there, Speaker Tip O'Neill, came in. And I remember speaking to Congressman Nichols about the Speaker. Now, I didn't attempt to go speak to the Speaker because I felt if it was appropriate for me to meet him, Congressman Nichols would have taken me over there to him. But I remember talking to Congressman Nichols about the Speaker and how many of our people did not hold the Speaker in high esteem because they felt he was too liberal, that he was doing too many things that were out of touch with our people in Alabama. And I distinctly remember him saying, Tip has a heart as big as a number 10 wash tub. Now, for people that are not from the country, they may not understand that would be one that people would use to take a bath in the day before we had running water in their house. But I knew that that meant he held the Speaker in high esteem. In spite of the fact he may not always agree with him politically, he wanted to make sure that I knew that he was doing what he being Speaker O'Neill, was doing what he thought was right given the circumstances each and every time.
A lot of young people are considering getting into politics, and maybe even have gotten into politics. They're just new to their office. We have some freshmen and some new people holding different offices throughout the state. What advice do you have to those people who are just starting their political careers?
Well, you know, Alan, one of the things that I think is unfortunate today is that so many young people are so interested in having it all today. They are not interested in paying their dues. They're not interested in gaining experience. They're not interested in understanding what challenges there are out there. They think that because they're smart, that they're good looking, that they dress nice, that they're ready to lead right now, as well as someone who's been around for 3 or 4 decades in public service and trying to find a way to continue to serve. And I think a mature young person who understands that there are dues to pay, who understands that there are things they need to learn, who understands that some things can only be gained because of experience, is the wiser one and the one who will ultimately be the most successful. I've often asked some of the young people who've approached me by giving them examples of people who have served our state in roles in the past whose careers ended before they were 45 years of age. You know, would you rather be that person, or would you rather be, again, like Governor Ivey, who is now in her 70s, late 70s, and is the governor in her 3rd term, filling an unexpired term, a full term, and now just being elected to her final term as our governor. And without question, most of them say, I'd rather be where Governor Ivey is, where you've had a life to contribute as opposed to just a brief period of time where you were a shining star that faded away.
Well, the Secretary of State is a constitutional officer, well known within the state, but that office, not just in Alabama, but across the country, has risen to national prominence. Why is it that that position is so central to American politics right now? Why is it getting so much attention?
Well, obviously that's related to all of the issues that we've had on us since 2020. And I had the privilege to chair the National Commission on Election Integrity that was designed to encourage the passage of legislation that would make it easier to vote and harder to cheat in all 50 states throughout the Union. We put together a report that enabled us to introduce 5 pillars that people could build their foundation on to be successful. And the states that have done that are states that are now recognized as leaders in election integrity. Of course, Alabama was recognized as the #1 state in election integrity while I was the secretary, the first time in the history of our state that had ever occurred. But I take a lot of pride in that, Alan, just knowing that we made a positive difference in the administration of elections.
Well, are we done seeing you in politics? Are you going to do anything else in politics in the future? I've got to ask it.
Well, you know, forever is a long time. So it's difficult for me to say today as we sit here in February of 2023, and for me to say, yes, I'm going to run again, or no, I'm not going to run again. If I choose to run for elective office in the future, I want it to be in a position where I can have the most impact and make the biggest difference for the people of the state of Alabama. I know that it's possible to be impactful without being an elected official. I have done so in the past. Many of my friends do so each and every day. There are people who are in elected positions who are not impactful in their public service. So making sure that I choose wisely, making sure that I choose well, and making sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons is the most important challenge that I will face, and the most important question I have to answer as I consider whether or not I will attempt to serve in public office again.
Well, this will be my last question for you. What can be done to improve lives and institutions in our state? What should our priorities be as just people, not as political leaders, not necessarily as business leaders, not necessarily as teachers, but just as human beings, citizens of this state? What can people be doing to improve the conditions in which we operate?
Alan, I think the most important thing we can do is be kind to other people. I mean, Glenn Campbell said it best, just show a little kindness. I don't think that people are generally bad people. I think that most people are inherently good. And I think people want to see other people do well. But because of the nature of the environment that we're in today, there are so many people that are driven toward selfishness and selfish attitudes that don't have hearts for service. In Mark, the Bible teaches us that we that want to be the leaders must be the servants. And if we're not committed to that position, we're not going to be successful ultimately, because the most important thing is to be successful in the Lord's eyes, not in man's eyes. And in order to do that, we need to have a heart of servanthood and a desire to be servants and to give to others and not to just find a way to take all the time.
Well, show a little kindness and be a good servant. You've heard it here from Secretary of State John Merrill, who's out there doing great things right now. Secretary, it was great to have you here. Thank you very much. This has been Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business. I'm Alan Mendenhall, your host, Associate Dean of the Sorrell College of Business, Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. Thank you very much for watching.